Welcome back, children. Now we will move on to the next topic, that is equilibrium price and the chain of effect. Now what is meant by equilibrium price? You all know it is a point where, or it is a price which is determined at a point where demand is equal to supply. And we will be learning what happens if the demand and supply shift to the rightward and the leftward, and what will be the chain of its effect. And the two areas where the government intervenes will be discussed under this particular video. Now let us see what is an equilibrium price. An equilibrium price is a price which is determined by the forces of demand and supply. So we can write equilibrium price is equal to a point where equilibrium price is the point where demand is equal to supply. Now let us see the equilibrium price with the help of a table. Now the prices given here are 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10. At price 2, you can find market demand is inversely related to the price. At price 2, 100 is demanded. When price is 4, demand decreases to 80. When price is 6, demand decreases to 60. When price is 8, demand again decreases to 40. And when price is 10, demand again decreases to 20. Now market supply, when price is 2, market supply is 20. When price has increased to 4, market supply also has increased to 40, because you know market supply is positively related to price. When price is 6, market supply has increased to 60. When price is 8, market supply has increased to 80. When price is 10, market supply has increased to 100. Now in the first two prices you can find market demand is greater than market supply. Here when the price is 6, you can find market demand is equal to market supply. At prices 8 and 10, market demand is less than market supply. So price 6 is the only point where market demand is equal to market supply. Now the same I have depicted in the form of a diagram, which you are familiar with this diagram when we learned about the equilibrium price determination in a perfect competition where industry fixes the price. Isn't it? The same example we have taken here too. Now the same thing I have represented with the help of a diagram where supply curve is upward sloping and demand curve is downward sloping, and this is the price 6 where demand is equal to supply. Both of them intersect at a point where demand is equal to supply, and the quantity demanded and supply are 60. Now this is known as an equilibrium price. Why this is known as an equilibrium price? The price in the market will be determined by the forces of demand and supply. Any deviation from that particular price will make to reach the price back to the same level itself. I mean, if the price deviates from 6 either to 2 or 4 or either to 10 or 12, again it will be coming back to the same price due to the forces of demand and supply. Now let us see how the forces of demand and supply are playing to bring back the price back to the equilibrium level of 6. Let us see the first example where the price is lesser than 6 as 4 and 2. Let us see the situation. From 6, let us deviate from this 6 where price is 4 and 2. Okay, if the price is lesser than 6, what will happen? At this price, you know, both demand and supply are equal. When the price is lesser than 6, that means 4 and 2, we will just see a dotted line. We will draw a dotted line. There here no intersection point is there. Therefore, like this we are drawing a dotted line here too. No intersection point is there. We can reach the end part only here. This is the end part of the market demand curve. Here we could make an end here because both demand and supply are intersecting. After that there is no need of going to this area. But here we can stop it here, because there is no intersection point, therefore we have to extend it and we will be stopping here only. So this here you can find it is touching the market demand curve, isn't it? Therefore what conclusion we can arrive? At a price lesser than 6, that is in 4 and 2, there will be excess demand in the market. There will be excess demand in the market. excess demand. Definitely you know when the price decreases from 6 to 4 and 2, there will be excess demand in the market. People will demand more. That is clearly depicted in this diagram, where you can find when we extend it. I have taken the example of price 2. When I extend it, it will be stopping here only where it touches MD, market demand. Therefore, this area you can find it as excess demand. Now, when there is excess demand, I told you, now the price is at 2, it will come back to the same price 6. How? Now there is excess demand, right? When there is excess demand, that means people are demanding more for the commodity. When people are demanding more for the commodity, the producers will be willing to supply that much amount in the market only if the price is increased, because you know the producers are willing to produce and sell more in the market only if its price increases. Therefore, at price 2, if there is an excess demand, producers are willing to meet the demand only if the price increases from 2. So, they will demand a price 6 where market demand is equal to market supply. So, here the price is at 2 where there is excess demand. That excess demand will be met by the suppliers only if the price increases. Thus, the price increases from 2 to 6 where market is back to the equilibrium point where demand is equal to supply. So, if the price is lesser than the 6, it will automatically reach to the price 6 itself due to the forces of demand and supply. Here demand and supply force has played a very important role to bring back the price back from 2 to 6, isn't it? Due to the excess demand of the consumers, producers are willing to supply that only when the price increases. Similarly, we will take the situation of the price above 6, for example 10. If the price is 10 or 12, what happens? If the price is 12, we can just draw a dotted line and see here there is no intersection point. Just move and we will reach the point here of market supply curve. So, this area is represented by excess supply, isn't it? Here there is excess supply. Now, when there is excess supply, what is meant by that? Producers have more stock of products in their hands, isn't it? Therefore, they need to sell it and clear it from them. They need to sell it in the market. How they can increase the sale in the market if they have excess supply? Normally, you can just imagine, isn't it? You can just answer it. A producer to sell more in the market. If there is excess supply with him, if he wants to clear it out, he needs to reduce his price because there is excess supply than what is needed. So, in order to clear that excess supply, if he is not clearing, what will happen? It will remain as a stock, isn't it? So, in order to clear that excess supply, he is ready to, he has to reduce the price. Then only consumers will be tempted to buy it. So, automatically from 12, he will reduce it and he will come back to the point of 6 where again the market equilibrium is determined. So, if the price is more than 6 or less than 6, automatically due to the forces of demand and supply, the market equilibrium price will be achieved. So, once again, if the price is more than 612, there is excess supply. To clear that excess supply, producers will have to reduce the price for giving a temptation for the consumers to buy, and therefore the price will get reduced and ultimately it reaches the point of 6 where demand is equal to supply. So, what I am trying to convey the message is, if the price is deviated from the equilibrium price to a higher level or to a lower level, ultimately it will reach to the equilibrium price of 6 due to the forces played by demand and supply in the market. Okay. Now, we will move on to the next topic. Suppose if there is a shift in the demand and supply. Now, this is a supply curve and this is a demand curve. Now, let us imagine if there is a shift in the demand and shift in the supply curve. Now, when do a shift in the demand curve and supply curve takes place? For learning this particular topic, you have to bring the concept of change in quantity supplied and change in supply, change in quantity demand, change in demand in your mind. That is very essential for this topic. So, we will learn about a shift in the demand curve and supply curve. When do a shift in the demand curve and supply curve takes place? In the concept change in demand or change in supply due to the leftward, due to the increase or decrease in supply and demand, isn't it? Now let us learn that particular concept. The heading of this particular topic is effect of changes in demand and supply on market equilibrium. How the market equilibrium is affected when there is a change in the demand and supply. How do the market equilibrium is affected when there is a change in demand and supply? Now let us first discuss the change in demand. So whenever you learn change in demand, what should come to your mind? Change in demand is always represented by a shift in the demand curve, either to the rightward or to the leftward. Okay. Now I have represented the same here. I have represented both the situations in two diagrams. One is rightward shift of the demand curve, the other one is leftward shift of the demand curve. What will be the chain of effect when the demand curve is shifting to rightward and leftward? Okay, so for that we will learn it from the figure. Now figure number 1, that is rightward shift of the demand curve. That means increase of the demand curve. Now when do an increase of the demand curve takes place? When price remains to be constant and other factors changes, isn't it? So we have to represent both change in quantity and change in supply and change in quantity supplied. Change in demand, change in quantity demanded. So we have to represent the price in the diagram as a must. Now this is a diagram which I have drawn for you. Now here you can find supply curve is an upward sloping curve, demand curve is a downward sloping curve. Initial demand curve is DD. Now initial demand curve is intersecting the supply curve at point E. Okay, this is the point. So from that point, if you draw to the y-axis, you will get the price, and if you draw to the x-axis, you will get the quantity. So OQ is the initial quantity and OP is the initial price, E is the equilibrium point, D is the demand curve and S is the supply curve. Suppose if the demand increases, increase in the demand is represented by a rightward shift of the demand curve to D1, D1. When the demand curve is shifting to the rightward, the new demand curve is represented as here, isn't it? Now with the new demand curve, what happens? From the equilibrium point, if we measure the distance, you can find this gap, isn't it? This gap. I am marking the end point of this gap as A. Now this gap is known as excess demand. This gap is known as excess demand. Now this excess demand has to be met by the producers. So till now we were discussing about change in the supply, that is change in the demand, change in the demand where there is a rightward shift of the demand curve. Now we are going to speak about the topic change in quantity supplied and change in quantity demanded. So both the concepts are used together in this diagram. So in order to understand this, you have to be very familiar with change in quantity demanded, change in demand, change in quantity supplied, change in supply. Now this part EA is the excess demand, that from the initial equilibrium point, if we are measuring the distance to the new demand curve, I have given the end point of that as A. This is the excess demand. Now excess demand will be met by the producers only if the price is increased, isn't it? Because people are demanding more and more. So the producers will be interested to meet that increased demand only when the price increases, isn't it? They will be ready to meet that excess demand only when the price increases, because people are in need of that commodity. Producers know it very well. So therefore the producers are willing to supply that at a higher price than the existing price. What is the existing price? P. And the producers are ready to meet this excess demand of EA only by increasing the price. So somewhere over here we can set the new price. Okay, somewhere over here, isn't it? That is P1. I have already drawn it for you for the easiness. So somewhere over here, just above the P, we have to keep that in mind. Now when the price increases, what will happen to the suppliers? suppliers will be tempted to supply more, which is represented. So, price has to increase. So, price has to increase means what? Price is changing. To which concept we have to move? Change in quantity supplied. Change in quantity supplied happens when the price changes. That means we are setting a price above the initial price. So, movement along the same supply curve, that should be the concept which has to come to your mind. Change in the quantity supplied happens when there is a change in the price. Movement along the same supply curve, the two concepts which we have learned in the form of a table. Now here, somewhere above the price P, we are going to set a new price. At the new price, suppliers will be willing to supply more. Willing to supply more means what? Expansion of supply, isn't it? That expansion of supply takes place along the same supply curve. We are going to represent that expansion of supply by an upward arrow here, because always expansion of supply is represented in the upward arrow, isn't it? Isn't it? Okay, clear all of you? Here, this side. This is the area where we show the upward movement, expansion of supply. Okay, for suppliers it is expansion of supply. Okay, because why? New price is fixed. But with the new price which is fixed, which is higher than the previous price, what will be the attitude of the consumers? Consumers will contract the demand, isn't it? There also you have to bring the concept, change in the quantity demanded. Price has increased here. So, what the consumers should do? The consumers will obviously contract their demand. That contraction of demand is represented in the new demand curve, movement along the same demand curve. The contraction of demand happens this way, isn't it? Because in the demand curve, contraction is through this way, isn't it? When the price increases, demand will decrease, isn't it? So, this contraction of demand and expansion of supply, both the arrow marks will be in the same direction. So, with the expansion of supply and contraction of demand, the complete, both the arrow marks will be moving to same direction. The excess demand will be fully wiped off from the market, and the new equilibrium point, they are moving to the same direction. Thus, excess demand will be wiped off from the market, and a new equilibrium situation is created at point E1, where the new demand curve intersects the existing supply curve with the new price P1. So, P1 is the new price which is set above the P. At this price, suppliers are happy, the consumers are not happy. That is why contraction of demand, expansion of supply. The new quantity is OQ1 and the old quantity is OQ. This is how we explain the effect of shift in the demand curve, which is the rightward shift. I hope this is clear to you. Likewise, we have to explain the effect of shift in the demand curve, which is a leftward shift of the demand curve. Now, let us see how to explain that. Now, this is the existing demand curve, D, and existing supply curve is S. Okay. Now, we are going to explain the process. Initial demand curve is intersecting the supply curve at point E. Okay. Now, when the demand decreases, decrease in the demand is represented by a leftward shift. The new demand curve is D1. When the new demand curve is shifting leftward, from the equilibrium point, if we measure to the side, we can see that EA is the deficient demand area. Deficient demand. So, when there is a deficient demand, which it means what? Producers are excess in supply, there is deficient demand. So, in order to clear the stock, what the suppliers have to do? They have to sell their product at a lesser price. Therefore, a price will be set at a level lesser than the P. So, when the price is set at a level lesser than P, what will happen to the supply? Supply will be contracting. Contraction of supply is represented as this arrow, and at a low price, the consumers will be interested to buy more. Movement along the demand curve at the new demand curve, consumers will expand their buying. So expansion of demand and contraction of supply both moves in the same direction, and finally it reaches at a new equilibrium point by wiping off all the deficient demand. The new equilibrium point they will be reaching where price is fixed lower than P1, that is OP, and the new quantity as OQ. This is how we explain for a leftward shift of the demand curve. So similarly, you have to explain for the supply curve as well. So when you explain the supply curve, what will happen? There will be leftward and rightward shift of the supply curve. Leftward and rightward shift of the supply curve. How will you explain that? Before, the demand curve has shifted, but here the supply curve is going to shift. First we will look on to the rightward shift of the supply curve. Now initial supply curve is S in the diagram, initial demand curve is D in the diagram. Both of them will intersect at point E. Now there is an increase in the supply. How will you represent increase in the supply? By a rightward shift of supply curve to S1. So from the equilibrium point, if we mark a point to the new supply curve, you will get EA, which is excess supply. Now the supply is excess. Now if you know when the supply is excess, it means what? There is stock for the suppliers, isn't it? Therefore, in order to clear that stock, definitely suppliers have to reduce the price. So we will try to fix a price below P1. Now when a price is fixed below P1, price is changed. Now we are moving on to the concept change in quantity supplied and change in quantity demanded. So when the price is fixed as just below P1, what happens to the supply? The new supply curve is S1, isn't it? New supply curve is S1. What will happen? The suppliers will try to contract their supply, isn't it? This is a contraction of supply. But consumers are very happy due to the lesser price. They will expand their demand. So this is the arrow mark for expansion of demand, isn't it? So with the expansion of demand and the contraction of supply, both of them will be moving in the same direction. Thus moving on to the same direction from here, they will wipe out the whole excess supply in the market, and finally they will reach the new equilibrium point E1, where the existing demand curve is intersecting the new supply curve, and the new quantity is OQ, and the new price which is fixed below the P1 is OP. This is how we explain the chain of effect. Okay, so initially the market was in equilibrium. After that, what happens when the supply and demand is shifting to the rightward as well as to the leftward? That is a point that we are learning here. Now here also you can find there is a leftward shift of the supply curve. Initial supply curve is E, it intersects the demand curve. Initial supply curve is SS, it intersects the demand curve at point E. From there, if we draw a line to the new supply curve, you can find A, this is deficient supply, isn't it? Supply is deficient supply. If there is a deficient supply, producers will be, deficient supply means what? Excess demand, isn't it? The producers will be ready to supply more only if the price increases. Therefore, we have to set, this is the equilibrium price, right? So we have to set a price above this P. Okay, somewhere over here, isn't it? Now, when the price is set high, what will happen to the demand? The demand will contract, and in the new supply curve, you can find expansion of supply. So, with the expansion of supply and contraction of demand moving in the same direction, the full excess deficient supply will be wiped off, and it reaches the new equilibrium point E1, where the existing demand curve intersects the new supply curve. And the new price is fixed at P1, which is P1. From this equilibrium point, you draw a line to y-axis, P1, which is higher than P. So at the new price, quantity is OQ1, and at the old price, quantity is OQ. This is how we explain the effect, chain of effect, when there is a change in the demand and supply either to the rightward or to the leftward. Now all the 4 diagrams, I hope it is very clear to you. Draw the diagram and learn, then only you will be thorough with the topic. Now, I told you the equilibrium price is determined at a point where market demand is equal to market supply. That happens automatically in the market, where demand and supply is getting adjusted with themselves and bringing the equilibrium price. But in some situation, the market demand and market supply, its adjustment will not work out. At the time, government has to intervene. So, next topic that we are going to learn is the types of government intervention in fixing the price. In some cases, the market forces of demand and supply will not be sufficient in order to fix a price. So, that price which is fixed by the market demand and market supply sometimes will not be acceptable to some consumers and some producers. Therefore, as a concept of welfare, it is a duty of the government to intervene and fix a price for both consumers and producers. So, we are going to learn about the two types of intervention made by the government for fixing the price. The two types of interventions are one for the consumers and one for the producers. It is named as price ceiling and price floor. Now, let us see what is this price ceiling and price floor. First is price ceiling. What is price ceiling? Price ceiling refers to fixing the maximum price of a commodity at a lower level than equilibrium price. Now, you know what is meant by an equilibrium price, isn't it? Equilibrium price is a price which is determined by the forces of demand and supply. So, in this diagram, equilibrium price is OP1, isn't it? OP1 is the equilibrium price which is fixed by the forces of demand and supply. See, demand and supply intersect at point E. There the price is determined as OP1. This is equilibrium price. Now, this equilibrium price will not be acceptable for certain consumers. For example, the poorer sections of the people who are not able to buy that, the existing price will not be acceptable for them. So, in that case, the government will intervene and government will fix a price below the equilibrium level. That price is known as price ceiling. Here, the government has intervened and the price which is lesser than OP1 is fixed by the government. So, the price which is fixed by the government is OP. Now, at OP you can find, if you extend a line just as what we have done before, we can find, see, there is excess of demand. There is excess of demand. Here you can find there is excess of demand, isn't it? Excess of demand. Okay. Now, when there is excess of demand, the government has to meet that excess of demand, isn't it? Government has to meet that excess of demand. So, at a lower price, the demand is more and more. You know the basic theory, isn't it? So, at that time, demand is excess. See, this is the excess demand. Now, it is the responsibility of the government to meet that excess demand because government has fixed a price below the equilibrium level. So, when the price is fixed below the equilibrium level, there is an excess demand. Now, in this situation, black marketing is a direct consequence. Why? Because the local producers will sell the commodity at a price higher than what is fixed by the government. So, in order to meet this excess demand, what has to be done? The government introduces rationing system. A minimum quota of essential commodities will be available at a price lesser than the equilibrium price. So, how government is meeting that excess demand? The government will meet the excess demand by providing the commodities at a price lesser than the equilibrium price by providing them with rationing system. So, under the rationing system, people will be getting the necessities, essential commodities such as rice, wheat, etc. at a price which is lesser than the market price. If 1 kg of rice cost 38 or 40 rupees outside, it will cost only for 10 rupees or 5 rupees or 2 rupees according to the different types of ration cards available for the consumers. So, that is what government does. So, government is fixing a price which is lesser than the equilibrium price. The equilibrium price which was fixed was OP, which was OP1, say for 50 rupees, which was not at all possible for the poor people to buy. Therefore, government has fixed a price of 10 or 20 accordingly, so that the poor consumers can also buy it. So, when the government fixes that price, the excess demand is met by rationing system. Now, under this situation, there are even at the ration shops, you can find people will sell these products at a high price which is higher than the existing one. So, that kind of black marketing happens in the price ceiling in this particular market situation. Okay. So, that is how the government meets the requirement. So, to meet the excess demand, government introduces the rationing system. A minimum quota of essential commodities will be available at a price less than the equilibrium price. So, this is for the consumer. So, government is favoring the consumers here. Now, it is a responsibility of the government to favor both consumers as well as the producers. Producers cannot be left out. They also need some kind of protection from the government. Okay. Now, let us see what is that. Price floor. So, in order to protect the producers, the measure or government intervention is price floor. The other one is price ceiling. This one is price floor. It refers to the minimum price, that is above the equilibrium price. The other one was below the equilibrium price, and this one is above the equilibrium price fixed by the government, which the producers must be paid for their produce. Now, the aim of the producers are maximum profit. Producers should get at least a minimum profit. They should not go beyond that particular level. So, in that situation, it is a responsibility of the government to protect the producers. So, for protecting the producers, government has introduced the price floor. Price floor means setting a minimum price for the commodities. Whose commodity? Producers' commodity. How they set the price? By setting the price above the equilibrium price. That is known as price floor. Now, let us learn that with the help of the diagram. Now, this is the diagram. Now, in this diagram you can find initial equilibrium is point E, where demand is intersecting with supply. At that particular point, we can say demand is equal to supply, and the price corresponding to that is equilibrium price. Okay. Now, the existing price, with the existing price, the producers are not happy. They are not getting the benefit of what they have produced. So, government will fix a price above that equilibrium price. That price is known as price floor. So, what government has fixed here is P1. The government has fixed here as P1. Okay. So, when the price is fixed for P1, you can find, if you draw a dotted line, you can find there is excess supply here, isn't it? Excess supply. Excess supply is represented by the area AB, isn't it? If the price is fixed high, the producers are willing to supply more, and now in the market there is excess supply. Now, in that present situation, price can't be bring down, because it is the government who has fixed the price above the equilibrium price. So, how that excess supply will be met by the government? Excess supply by the producers will be fully purchased by the government, and that will be maintained as the buffer stock. You have learned it in class 9, isn't it? Now, this particular price which is fixed by the government P1, which is above P. Why government has fixed that price P1 above P? This P as the price is not at all profitable for the producers. So, in order to make them comfortable, government has raised the price to P1. This price is known as minimum support price. It is a support for the producers. So, for that their price will not go down. So, you can recollect the concept that you have learned in class 9, isn't it? Minimum support price. So, with the minimum support price, quantity has now exceeded, because at new higher price, producers are willing to supply more. Now, there should be somebody to buy this excess supply when the price is more, isn't it? Government is ready to buy all those excess supply from the producers, and government will keep it as a buffer stock. Now, why government is keeping it as a buffer stock? Government can use it when there is a shortage of food grains, and government can provide it through rationing system. So this is how that system works. Okay, so maintaining of buffer stock. So these are the two tools used by the government both for consumers and producers. For consumers it is price ceiling, and for the producers it is price floor. So I hope the concepts are very clear to you. Go through the diagram, draw it and learn, then only the concepts will be clear to you. Thank you.